29% of people have been bullied at work, according to a poll carried out for the TUC, and the highest prevalence of workplace bullying is among 40 to 59-year-olds.
Hello and welcome to the show. Colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark. This week we debate how to beat the bully. Well, there seems to be an unusual trend going on at the moment regarding bullying. For example, Speaker John Bercow is facing calls to quit after a report into bullying in the House of Commons. Now, there have been many people who are calling for him to actually quit, such as Women and Equalities Committee Chairwoman Maria Miller and Senior Labour MP Sir Kevin Barron both said new leadership was needed. And as a result of this bullying and harassment, it seems that the Commons is due now for an overhaul. Perhaps it's because of culture of acquiescence and silence. But it's not just in the House of Commons. We're also seeing it in other places. For example, a group of senior clinicians at NHS Highland have spoken out about what they claim to be a culture of bullying at the health board. What is going on? Surely there is no place anymore for these prehistoric creatures. Bullies are a thing of the past, surely. Give you an example. Here's a little poem. The Woolly Bully. Wally the mammoth was very woolly, but basically also a bit of a bully. Wherever he went, he caused dissent, and other animals hated him fully. Wally was largely an annoying aggressor, like many a prehistoric predecessor. Poking with each tusk, from dawn until dusk, he was the ultimate suppressor. Sometimes it takes an ice age for change against something beastly and strange. So those overpowered stood up to the coward to keep him well out of range. When Wally felt this chill, he blinked and quickly became hoodwinked. He was frozen out for being a lout, and this dinosaur became extinct. So, Clergyman Pete, are we seeing that actually being a bully is really old and a bit of a dinosaur? Or actually are we seeing now a new trend? Is there a new animal on the market? Clergyman Pete, what is going on with the world of bullying? Why is it everywhere?
Well, it's interesting, the many reports that have been coming out. I mean, this isn't new, although there have been new incidents that have made their way into the news, haven't there? But this isn't a new problem. Problems of bullying in workplace, of course, in schools, it's been known for some time amongst children. But it's just, I don't know that there's a great increase. We're becoming more sensitive to it, having more reports on it, reporting it more, I should say. And that's a good thing in highlighting the issue. And bullying is a terrible evil because it can... bullying being sort of the persecution of someone, victimization of someone. Before we came out, we were discussing that. What is the definition of it? And that's sort of that goes towards a definition, I guess. So bullying has to have a victim. It has to have someone who's therefore being victimized in some way. And if someone is being bullied, it can totally ruin their lives. The problem that I would have is that often the actual bully is misidentified. Now, you heard the quote right at the start of the show. I quoted a poll carried out by YouGov for the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, so representing unions, which represent workers who have claims of bullying against managers. Now, in this case, the most powerful body is the TUC, and therefore being the most powerful, the most likely to be bullying is the TUC. So what we need, you see, is to correctly identify who is actually bullying. Now, I think that there are managers, people who are bullying people at work, and the results of that same poll that I quoted says that 72% of the cases reported were bullying carried out by a manager. In other words, someone who the TUC represents the worker against. And so you immediately, to my mind, say, is this a case of many managers bullying, or is this an example, evidence that the TUC is bullying managers. I think bullying is seriously. I think it's evil because it brings down people to such an extent that it increases depression and suicide. And of course, from a business point of view, businessman Mark, you will chime in with this. I'm sure that it reduces productivity. So
well, absolutely,
we need it dealt with. But
Yep.
is the TUC and our unions actually making the situation worse by stirring up the pot? Because they're putting that, not for bad reasons, for good reasons. They're trying to solve the problem of bullying, but they're spotting too many and therefore making it worse.
Well, indeed. I mean, for sure. You're absolutely right from a business point of view. Anything which is of a toxic nature in the sense that individuals or groups who persecute individuals, perhaps because of either jealousy or even perhaps political differences, is obviously not productive. But I think that one of the things that's absolutely crucial is transparency, because one of the things that often comes into this sort of a culture of bullying is when people aren't always aware of the challenges. It could be an individual on an individual, or it could be a department that's suffering from this. And ultimately, what needs to happen is there needs to be some mechanism where people can report. Now, many people, many companies have actually chosen to stop this by having what's called an independent report it mechanism, meaning that you have either a group or a source, which actually in some cases is hired help by the company to allow individuals to actually air their concerns about bullying or bad behavior. So remember, bullying comes in different forms. It could be that there is a genuine persecution. There's something where they've got an issue with somebody's political standpoint, and they're just persecuting them. Or maybe it's possibly worse than that. It could be something where they hold some jealousies. Maybe if it's a man that they don't really like women in the workplace or something like that, or vice versa for that matter. Mm-hmm. Clearly what you want is some mechanism to be able to stop it. Now, a lot of companies are very conscious of this. Now, as we've seen in the media quite recently, and quite rightly, there's been lots of issues over, gender parity and pay gaps and many things like that. Some people have actually sometimes used the term bullying. I would like to sort of clarify where sometimes it can actually go the wrong way. For example, if a manager has to reprimand an employee for just simply poor performance, doesn't mean to say that they're a bully. They might be reprimanding those individuals simply because the individual has been either lazy or just non-productive and just hasn't been listening and doing their job. And so there is the counter argument to what really is a bully. And I think your point here is, what is the definition of a bully? It's not somebody who's necessarily enforcing the company's policies, somebody who's trying to do good for the business or for individuals and for customers, etc. It's actually somebody who's a bully is somebody who's persecuting someone. And what we've noticed is that there is a culture in certain areas of society where perhaps some people believe they can get away with it because it's either through personal gain. So, for example, if they've got if there's a manager who perhaps has a great talent who might expose them for what they are, in the sense that they're not as good. And so sometimes suppressing individuals can actually be quite detrimental. And for people, particularly in their early career, that can be quite stifling. You mentioned about words, but it's not also about words. It's also some physical bullying as well. You mentioned around the school. I think many people typically are scarred by that, and it carries through life. So schools themselves I know are doing a great deal to try and beat the bully. And I know there's an irony in that phrase, but there's something probably slightly more sinister, and that's on social media.
Yes.
And that's where it doesn't just affect children, it affects adults, where people are persecuted or bullied online because either that they don't like the look of the person, that they don't like them because they don't have enough followers or friends.
Yes.
And so social media is another form of bullying that we've seen as a trend.
Yeah. Now, let's take a little look at the motivation of bullies, because when we're talking about people's prejudice, now ACAS, in looking at workplace bullying, raises the question. They, in a report they published a few years ago, that there's a problem with confusing, or you confuse the issue by saying, "Oh, someone's behaving in a racist manner," and that's bullying. I mean, it is a type of bullying, but it's best to be specific. What are you talking about? Someone's got a prejudice, so that's what the problem is. Bullying itself doesn't necessarily have to be due to hatred. I mean, we're talking about persecution, but the persecution can be with the end of, in terms of workplace bullying, making the job be done better. It's just that they're doing it in the wrong way, in an aggressive way, in a dehumanizing way. It's still bullying. If you take it too far, the effect can, as you say, be devastating. When we're talking about peer-to-peer bullying, and there's a social aspect to it, I guess it's difficult to see a good motivation behind it, and that both types need to be rooted out. When it comes to being online, though, I can see the same thing. There's the same sort of thing operating. If you are online and you're involved in social media, and you see the social media arguments or whatever as a game, you don't see the people behind it. You don't realise what effect you're having. So the bully is not deliberately persecuting the person, that they're behaving in a way that they think's appropriate. And in the same way, a manager in the workplace can end up bullying, or it can be, as I was saying, peer-to-peer bullying. But they think they're behaving in a way that's good and right. They're thinking, "Oh, well, making sure the job gets done," or whatever. But in fact, they're not. They're making it worse, because they're not seeing the people as human beings. They're seeing the job separated from the human doing it. And so I think dehumanizing is behind a lot of the bullying that we're talking about. And as you say, it's exacerbated by cyberbullying. If you've got a computer between you and the person, you don't see them as a person. I think that the definition of bullying it's just so difficult. I don't see how you can have one definition, and that's why I think it's helpful to have.
They fall into different categories.
Yes. Yeah, different categories would be useful. So I've got a couple of this. This is again from ACAS, from that same recent report. I've got a couple of sentences, descriptors of bullying, which show the difficulty of categorizing something as bullying. So, for example, they would say that when you're bullying someone, bullying behaviour includes excessive or harsh criticism of work or abilities. Well, what is excessive? What is harsh? Isolating employees from normal work interaction. Isolating, or are you letting them get on with the job? Ignoring the person. Maybe you don't like them. I mean, why do it doesn't have to be a pally relationship to be an effective working relationship. Deliberately withholding productive work opportunities. Now you can see that, that's an issue. You think that's more easy to define. Well, might not be, because the work opportunities may not be appropriate for them. They might not be any good at it, or someone else might be better. Assigning meaningless, or I suppose boring tasks deliberately. Was it deliberate, or did it just need to be done? Devaluing work efforts. Well, maybe they were rubbish. I'm not arguing one way or the other. What I'm saying is it's so difficult to define that you're almost better, as you say, separating it out. Say, oh, this person's being racist, this person's being biased. Using what they're actually doing rather than the blanket term of bullying, in order to get to something that you can effectively prosecute. Well, not necessarily in the legal term prosecute, but something that you can have an effective complaint against. Otherwise, it becomes too vague, and you either end up having people accused of bullying and their careers being blighted when they haven't been bullying, or the other way, you get it missed out. You miss the bullying activity altogether because it's been too vague. I think we need to be more precise. I think there is work being done. I'm not saying there's not work being done, but I think we need to be more precise by not having people not accused of bullying per se. We can still report the statistics, but I mean, have them accused of the specific thing that they're doing wrong.
Well, yes, and the other thing as well is that usually a bully is really demonstrating vulnerabilities. Typically, there is some insecurity there. And normally what happens is that they have a perceived sense of power or position. Now, that's either because that's the only thing they've got. Effectively, they feel vulnerable because either they lack skills or they lack something which others that are around them do have, and of course they decide to react in that way. There are other reasons, of course. There are many reasons, as we've said. There are many different categories that shape a bully. Sometimes it's because of the way that they've been brought up. Something that's what they've been told to do to make progress, to actually get on in life. I'm sure we've all sort of been to school with people like that, and they've come from generations of people who just seem to adopt that approach. But usually it's something that's a vulnerability within that individual themselves. The point being here is that there is an irony when we talk about some of the things that we've mentioned about social media, that actually it is also to the counter of it, trying to expose the bully. And I think that whilst bullying does actually occur, because we've seen it, persecutions online of individuals, it's actually, in my personal view, this is just that if you have persecution online, it's worse because, as you said, it's a remote thing and it's actually out there in the public arena. The days when 50 years ago you is bad. It's certainly something that would probably stay with you for some time, but it's not as though that you can't learn and get over it. But when it sort of remains there for time immemorial online, it's quite damaging, and it has a greater effect. So I think that what really matters is this concept of the report it principle. And as a mechanism, I think that also social media companies have a lot of responsibility there to monitor things. I think as individuals, we need to rethink about what we're doing. So if we're going online, or if we happen to be listeners, if we've got some young listeners, in the school, or if we're in the workplace, it's all about now that actually you are under the spotlight. Don't think that you can get away with it. You are now in a world where everything is scrutinized. It's easy to track and it's easy to trace. At some point, you're going to be exposed. Now, we've talked about another one that's highly discussed, which is about Harvey Weinstein. We've seen some bullying and victimizations, albeit that it has a sort of a sex scandal element to it. But it is a form of bullying. And it's amazing how even the largest institutes, biggest players in the game, can be guilty of this. So the one thing that we can say is that you will be found out at some point. So it's more a case of think about your actions as well. I mean, from a sort of a more of a counselling perspective, you must see parishioners in your community who perhaps have suffered from this in some ways, and they must turn to you, I would imagine, and ask for help. But what sort of advice do you give to people who maybe have suffered? And it could even be bullying from people within their own families.
Well, ongoing bullying, I think you touched on this correctly, saying that the thing to do is to report, but I always advise report openly. Just tell everyone. As soon as you try and keep behaviour quiet, try and hush it up, maybe you're ashamed that you're being pushed around or whatever it is, it ends up getting worse. And it's worse for you if you've been emotionally affected by it, because then in keeping it to yourself, you allow it to fester and affect you more. So, yeah, it's always being open, telling people openly about telling the person who you feel is bullying you, and telling just being open and telling everyone. It seems
tell
surprising,
the world,
because doesn't that stir things up? Yes, it does stir things up, but it ends up with a slightly more chaotic way of living, but it ends up in the end with something that's healthier. So you end up with a livelier workplace, maybe, or a livelier parish, in that you have little arguments. But what you end up with is little arguments instead of big blow up arguments. Many little arguments is better than a big disastrous falling out.
I agreed, and also one that you won't take with you for the rest of your life as well, because that's the key thing. Well, listeners, what do you think? Have you suffered bullying, whether it be at school, whether it be at work, or anywhere else? I mean, what's your experiences? We'd love to hear from you. Why not log on to markandpete.com and let us know your thoughts? Fill out the contact form. This is an important subject. We would certainly like to read out your thoughts on the next show. So, thanks for joining this important subject, and join us again next time for Colourful Conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.